right. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I work here at Chalet. We're going to get ready to do our propagation class today. So we're going to give everyone a minute to kind of join in. We're going to spend some time with plants, one of my favorite things to do. And I got some of my propagations here with me. I took them from home. All different types of plants can be propagated in all sorts of different bottles and containers. All right. All right, so at the end, we're going to take our questions. So if you guys see a chat box there on your screen, you can go ahead and type in any questions you have throughout the class there, and then I can answer those for you at the end. And I think we're going to get started now. Good to go. All right, so again, my name is Stephanie. I work here at Chalet. Some of my favorite things are plants. And one of my favorite things to do with plants is to make more plants. And that is nearly for free. Most of these things you can have at home. But we also have tons of stuff for you guys to purchase to help you with it at home as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and we're going to start the presentation. Little sneak preview for you. I think it's going backwards, not forward.
Can you try the arrows instead? The arrows on the side instead.
No, it's still going forward. Oh, on the keyboard. My bad, everyone. All right, now we're good. So again, teaching you plant propagation. We're going to focus mostly on house plant propagation today because there is a lot that you can do for outdoors as well in your garden. But since it's winter and no one's out there yet, we're just going to focus on our indoor plants. And we are going to go off of this book. It's called Plant Parenting. It's one of our better information-wise books that we have here at Chalet. It's about $25. We try to keep it stocked at all times. It does go into stuff for outside as well. But we, again, just focusing on house plants. So there's two ways to do propagation. One is from doing it from seed, which most people don't think of as propagation, but it is one of the natural ways that plants create new plants in the wild. And then the other is vegetative propagation, which is the one that most people will do within their homes. And there's different ways to take propagations from your plants. One of the easiest ways is going to be offsets or pups. One of the plants that most people have at home is going to be your spider plant. And this just naturally makes these little tiny pups or offsets that when they're put into a rooting medium or into water, they create new roots in a new plant. And you can go ahead and repot that eventually into its own pot. And they look great in hanging baskets. So it's kind of the gift that keeps giving. I'm sure if anyone knows someone who has a spider plant, they've been offered propagations to take home very many times because they really do just keep doing it by themselves. And then the other thing that you can do is division. That one's one that you will do out in the garden and inside. Many plants don't necessarily have the ability to be propagated by a leaf or a cutting. So what you can do is separate the plant altogether. And then you can plant one half into one container and the other half into another. Leaf cuttings is the common way you see succulents propagated most of the time because they don't have as much stem and the little leaves fall off into the soil and then they'll create new plants there. Stem cuttings is the other common way. That's going to be this kind of stuff that you often see in people's windowsills. Pothos and trailing plants often like to do stem cuttings, but you could also do things that have more of an upright, like this is a purple passion. And another thing you can do is layering, which isn't necessarily cutting off of the plant right away. It's more of creating the environment for it to root a new plant. And I'll get more into that later. The underground propagules is bulbs, corms, and rhizomes. That's going to be things that are underneath the surface. Potatoes, snake plants is one of those. Most of the plant itself is underneath the soil. So that's just speaking of another type of division where you have to cut underneath the soil in the right place. We won't get too much into that just because it's easy to propagate these plants other methods as well. And then let's go over our materials. I brought some of those materials with me. So one of the first things, if you're going by water, is to have some nice and pretty places to put it. So this is one of the ones that we sell here at Chalet. It folds this metal frame into different directions, so it's really easy to make space for it on your windowsills. And these nice thin tubes help keep your plant upright. If you have a vase that's made for like flowers, that's too open on the top, sometimes they'll fall. But there are certain plants like the spider plant that does fit really nicely in a bud vase because of the width of the top of the plant. And the other thing you are definitely going to need is rooting medium or rooting hormones. Root gel is usually used for water because it helps stick to the plant itself when it's put into the water. The powder will just kind of wash off if you put it into water. So the powder is more for soil if you're propagating in soil. And then we also carry rooting concentrate. And this is something that you can use for water propagation. You'd put it into the glass of water diluted. Or it's for something like, should you take a division like with the calathea and you're worried you damaged roots in the process, you can use this in your water to help the transition of the plant. You're also going to need cutting tools. I brought my little snips from home. This is the Dram, same company. These are the ones I use for most things. Most house plants don't need huge clippers. So herbs, little stuff, these are perfect. We do carry larger pruners as well. So if you're doing something like palms or monsteras, something with a big cane that needs to be clipped, this is a better choice. If you want to do not water propagation or a substrate that's not soil, sphagnum moss is a good choice. People often use this in air layering, which we'll get into as well. Also for layering, ground pins. So if you're doing ground layering, this is to help keep the leaf or the stem into the ground so it can root. It can also be helpful for leaf cuttings to keep them on the soil. If you're doing soil or a substrate, you may want something to put the plant in. We have these little 2-inch, I was gonna say compostable, biodegradable seed starters. So you can actually put this whole thing into a bigger pot and it will eventually dissolve. Humidity is key when you're doing propagation. Doing it in water is easier because you don't have to worry about it so much. But if you're doing soil, you're going to want something on top of your propagations. This is a seed starter that we carry that's got nice height to it. Some of the seed starters are pretty low. This will be better for bigger plants. This is stuff you may have at home. Another method is just to put a stick into the soil of your propagation and a plastic bag over the top. And that's just to keep the humidity in. Nice cheap alternative as well. And then as far as keeping humidity manually, you've got misters and sprayers, which will help not disturb or soak the soil like you would with a watering can. All right. The screen locked. Hi guys, I'm back. Just knocked over the computer. This is another way I've kept humidity into some of my propagations. This is actually for food, but what's nice about it is it has this cork on top so I can let the air out without lifting the whole container. And I've got some different methods of propagation in there for us to look at later. And then I also have plant labels, which if you have a lot of plants or you forget what's what, it's very helpful. All right, here are some propagated house plants that people will often have in their homes. By leaf, you can do the African violet, begonia, snake plant, peperomias, and succulents. By stem, you could cactus. Some people think it's the leaf, but the cactus stem itself, it looks like leaves, like this guy. That's technically a stem propagation. Chinese evergreens, dumb canes, dracaenas, crotons, trailing plants like ivy, pothos, philodendrons, those are all going to do by stem as well. Offsets and divisions, you're going to have your spider plant doing pups, calatheas, you would separate. Hens and chicks is a type of succulent that has pups that grow naturally. Ferns, palms, peace lilies, those are more for division. And trailing plants will often become too full and you want to break them apart as well. That's division. And then is a little bit more complicated. Trailing plants are great for layering. Polka dot plants often grow out and up and start to lose leaves, so that's good for ground layering. And then ficus and other trees, air layering. Ferns also naturally ground layer. They have a little, I think it's a rhizome that grows across the surface of the soil and will find places for new plants. Okay, water rooting. This, like I said, is my favorite. It's the easiest and most exciting method because you don't have to worry about your humidity. And you also get to see the roots grow. So like my purple passion here, the roots just keep going and you get to watch that fill up the glass, which is actually a lot of fun. So to take your cutting, the first thing you need to do is to clean your blade. So I went ahead and cleaned mine earlier. You want to make sure it's clean because if your other plants have either, fungus or any sort of bacterial, when you cut your next plant, you have a possibility of infecting it. So always clean what you use to cut. And then you also want your rooting gel, because gel is better in water. And you want to fill your container already. Which I've done, and I will do a demo later and I'll show you that. And you want to make sure you change your water regularly. So sometimes you'll see the water gets a little cloudy, especially if there's not a whole lot of water in the container. You want to make sure that your water always looks nice and clean. And then you just set that on your windowsill. They like just a little bit of sun and you'll start to see some new growth as well usually. And a little tip, when the main root develops offshoots or secondary roots, that's when it's time to plant in the soil. Obviously for this guy, that was a long time ago. You can keep them in water as well. You just have to, if you decide to go into soil, keep the soil very, very wet so it can transition properly. Different types of roots grow in water versus in soil. All right, and let's get into some more other cuttings. So offset cutting, like I said, some of it's very easy, like with the spider plant. You don't even necessarily have to cut. They'll just fall off. You can pull them off and just set them on water. And I did bring a Chinese money plant like they have in the picture there with some offsets. So you're gonna have these little tiny plantlets growing out of the side of your plant. And you're going to go ahead and take that out and go ahead and pot it in new soil. It's good to use fresh soil. It's good to use moist soil. And then again, keep up your humidity so it's easier for the plant to root. Simple division, simple as it sounds. If you have more than one plant in the container, you just go ahead and take the whole plant out of the pot, break up the dirt, and almost like untangling hair, just gently kind of pull the root apart. And if you can't seem to get it apart, you can see she uses a clean blade there to get the rest of it apart. Whole leaf, that's, like I said, succulent is the most common way to do that. The snake plant is another one. This big leaf was the cutting. and these two new leaves are the plant growing. And there's different ways to take leaf cuttings. Different plants respond differently to how much material is left with the cutting. Here you have the leaf in the petiole, the stem. I'm just going to call it the stem, guys. I know it's not the main stem, but it's going to make it easier. And that will be for your African violets, your begonias, that kind of thing, where you just have a leaf and a little stem. And that's going to go in water, soil, wherever you'd like it to go. Here she planted it in soil. You kind of just want to roll up your root ball and place it inside. And then the non-petiole leaf cutting, or just partial leaf cutting, can be done with the snake plant. So instead of taking the whole leaf like I did here, I could have cut different sections along and planted each section to create more plants, which if you have a snake plant, it's got plenty of leaves already probably. So it depends on how many plants you're trying to get. African violet is the one on the other side there, and there's many different ways to propagate with them. They just happen to have the cells they need in a lot of different places in order to create the full plant. And another thing you should know, I'm going to stop sharing for a second here, is it's possible to take a cutting that doesn't have the correct cells to create a new plant, but still get roots. So like here I have a Chinese money plant, and it's not growing anything new. It's been rooting for a long time. You can see it's got secondary roots, so it could go into soil, but no plant is ever going to grow out of this. So we call that a blind cutting. Fiddle leaf, fig leaf, people will take those and try to root them. That will also often be a blind cutting. All right, split vein is kind of a complicated method. I haven't been able to do it successfully myself yet, but it is, again, with begonias and African violets. This is one that I did. You can kind of see in the preview there. You go under on the other side of the leaf, and you look at where the veins are, and you'll take a sharp blade and you'll just cut each vein open and press that down onto the soil. As you can see on one image, they use the toothpicks to help keep it in the soil. Your greening pins, that's another option to use to keep it in the soil. And then you want to keep the soil very moist, but not let the leaf sit in water because it will mold. Stem tip cutting is your most common. That's just taking cutting right from the top of the plant. That's what these purple passion are. I just took the cutting right from the top. If you do that on the mother plant, usually branches will come out from the side of where you cut. It will disrupt the growth pattern. So it's something that you want to keep in mind. It's sometimes called a terminal cutting because it's the end of the plant, and it will, like I said, disrupt the growing pattern and change the shape of the plants. Cane cutting is another way to do this. If you have a stem tip that has a lot of cane, you can take that portion of cane and try to root that as well separately and create more plants. You can either do that vertically or horizontally. With the horizontal, you can also cut the cane in half, like a piece of wood, and lay each half on the soil, and you'll have two plants starting as well. Stem leaf bud cutting is similar to your stem tip cutting, except you can then take more cuttings from the bottom. So say with your pothos, I could take a stem tip cutting here and cut this off, and then take another cutting portion here. And this would be a stem leaf bud cutting. And this could also create a new plant. Ground layering, as I mentioned with the pins, this is just kind of a little illustration. You use these pins to pin down a piece into the soil so that it can root again. I know I have polka dot plants at home that just grow sideways, and to get it to root there, you can then cut it from the mother plant and create the arrangement you want. Same thing with the purple passion. It does start to get kind of leggy and grows outwards. So you can create new plants that way, either in the same pot, or you can put a separate pot to the side and have it pinned down into that pot. Air layering is a little more complicated, but it is nice because you don't have to worry about humidity too much because you've wrapped the area in plastic and it really keeps it nice and wet. Monsteras is a great candidate for air layering. Ficus trees, something that's going to be more of a hard wood. You take the stem, you go ahead and cut into the stem just slightly so that you can then peel or cut off the outer bark. And you want to leave the inner bark intact. And then you take your sphagnum moss and you get this nice and wet, not soaking wet. So like soak it, and then before you use it, squeeze out any extra moisture. It just needs to be nice and moist. And you pack that around the wound that you created on the stem. And then you can wrap that in plastic wrap, foil. They create like pre-made air layering kits that will snap on to the branch as well. And then once you see the roots, like you can on this Monstera, through the bag, then it's time to go ahead and put it into soil. That's usually a couple months. All right, before we get into the questions, I'm gonna do a little demo. And I brought one of my babies from home. This is Cuban oregano, or a Vicks plant. And it smells like Vicks, which is why they call it a Vicks plant. So it's gonna get very smelly up in here, but I love the smell. The leaves are like a little fuzzy. It's really a beautiful plant. Not typically a house plant. It's more of an annual that you use outside. But because we're getting to that point where people are prepping for outdoors, what I can do is take my plant here, cut it down, try to make it pretty again, and then use the cuttings that I take to create new plants that I can then put out in my yard for the summer. And this, I wanted to do this demo because a lot of people have house plants that are overgrown, not looking as nice as they used to. And I don't want you to be scared to do maintenance on your plant. They do like being pruned, they like being cut back, just like they like being repotted when the time is right. So with a plant like this, you kind of get all of these long stems, and you can see that it's lost the leaves on the bottom. So it's not necessarily very pretty anymore. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut those long ones off first. All right. And you'll see along, we have all these new leaves starting. These are all nodes. And nodes are very important. That's where your roots come out of. So when you're looking at things like the pothos, you also have nodes, and you can see there's little bumps. Those are actually roots, the beginning of roots. So you always want to have a node with your cutting. That's a good rule of thumb. Not every plant needs it, but it's good for every plant to have one. So for this, now that I've taken the cutting, I don't need all this extra stem. So I'm going to go ahead and shorten that. And it's best to leave your final cut right below the node, so that there's not a whole lot of extra stem coming out of the bottom that ends up rotting and makes your water dirty, and then you have to change it more often. So now that it's a little bit shorter, I'm gonna go ahead and take off these bottom leaves, and I feel bad killing these little baby plants. Look how cute they are. But they all have to come off because it's gonna sit in water and they're gonna just rot and create mess. All right, and then I've got some water here. We're gonna go ahead and just stick that right in there. Generally, you wanna do as little water as possible for the cutting. And that's just to keep the water clean. If you have fertilizer in there, it's more effective. And then this I took maybe 2 weeks ago. And it's already got secondary roots. So because this plant is very easily propagated, it's easy to care for. It's an herb, grows like a weed. It's easy to do this one in the middle of winter. Some plants are a little bit pickier. They need certain sunlight, and you want to do those, early summer usually, when the plant is ready to grow more. Okay, and then with this plant too, ground layering would be an option. You can see some of these branches sticking out to the side here. I think I actually have one that had snapped and isn't connected anymore. Yeah, this guy. So this one had snapped off. I don't know if you can see, I'm just gonna pull it out. The stem is no longer connected, but you see there's a root growing in the bottom. So that was just doing it naturally, but this is a ground layer because this is now a new plant. So I could, if I wanted to, cut this down, put it in water anyway, or I can just take this whole thing, put it right in soil and let it grow from there. All right, and I'm gonna quickly go in and cut off some more of these tall guys. And if you're scared to cut your plant, you should be. And if you're worried about failing propagation, you will, but that's how you learn. And not every propagation goes perfectly. Sometimes you can't keep the humidity up. Sometimes it begins to rot. The plant was unhealthy. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and it's not always your fault. It's important to remember. Oops, see, that one had a little extra stem on him. All right, so now I've got some of those longer guys gone. I'm actually going to cut down some of these as well, because I know when the sun comes out, this guy's going to go crazy and just grow all over the place. This guy. Down. All right, now it's a much more manageable plant. It was looking a little bit small for the 6-inch pot, or large for the pot that it's in, the 6-inch pot. I could choose to repot it as well when it gets a little bit nicer out, or I could lift the whole plant out, remove some of the rooting, cut it down a little bit farther, and try to keep and maintain a plant that's going to fit in a 6-inch pot. So that's another way that propagation can help you. If you need to repot plants, but you don't want to go up to a bigger size, taking out portions of the plant can help you as well. Right, just gonna cut some of these. And again, see a node there, that little kind of a darker area, looks a little swollen. You want to cut right under that. And on an angle is usually best. And then you would dip this into your rooting gel. This is the store, so I'm not going to open it, but go ahead and just dip a little bit in that and then put it into your water. You can put multiple cuttings into one thing of water. I do it all the time. This is 3 stems of purple passion. The purple passion didn't like soil, so I cut off the top. The bottom of the plant died. This is the plant now. So there's a lot of ways that this can help you out, save plants from disaster, and you can also avoid fungus gnats by keeping plants in water as well. All right, I'm going to take a look at your questions. Can you do air layering with the fiddle leaf ficus? You can, yes. Ficuses are a great candidate for air layering. In air layering, the stem cut is on one side or all around. It's going to be all around. So when you have, I can actually maybe show you on one of these guys. I don't have a blade, I just have the snips, but it's nice to have like a box cutter or some sort of one-sided blade, a little knife. but you can kind of press down just a little and then twist the stem or the scissors if it's attached to your tree. It's kind of hard to twist the stem. And then do another one about an inch down. And then, so I don't know if you can see, there's a little, you can kind of see I made 2 cuts there. That's a little bit less than an inch, just because the space I'm allowed here. This, I'm not sure if it would even lend itself well to air layering. It really doesn't need this type of care. And then you're gonna go ahead and, like a potato peeler, kind of shave off the outer layer. And then you'll see that nice green inner part of your stem. And that's where the roots are going to come out of. So you'll get your sphagnum moss nice and moist, not dripping wet, wrap it around this area, wrap it again in plastic wrap, and then you can put twist ties or tape or something to keep the 2 ends in the sphagnum moss all together. Okay. Can you do propagation with most herbs right now? Yes. You can go ahead and do that any time of the year. Herbs are pretty easy. Herbs also like being cut down. It makes them grow better. So if you don't need to use your herbs, you can cut them and propagate them, or you can cut them and freeze them to use them later. Are the pins called greening pins or ground pins? Or, so this is called greening pins. Greening pins. And we have these at the store. They're $2.50 for a big box, more than you'll need for indoor house plants for sure. If you're doing stuff outside, you might want more, but that should be plenty. All right, let's go over to the Q&A. Is there a handout? We haven't put one out yet. If you guys really want one, okay, we won't have one, but we will be sending out the list of materials for you guys to look at. Can't see you and what you're doing too small. Sorry if I was showing you guys stuff in the small window. I can show you some of my plants if you're still interested in those. I have to prepare 40 spider plant babies for first graders for plants for their Mother's Day. Can you show how much water I should use when getting roots for the kids? Oh, wow. I'm sure you can definitely do it. Spider plants are just, they love to do that. This one is already well rooted, so you don't need much water. This is probably the least amount of water I have in any container sitting here. It just needs to touch, let me crack off a baby off of this guy. So when you take off the pup, you'll see little roots starting. And the plant just naturally does that. So only thing that needs to touch water is those little roots. So whatever container you can find where that's all it's sitting there, that's perfect. Soda bottles have a nice tight lip on the top. You can fill this all the way up so that your spider plant has water right where it needs to be. It's not detrimental. Spider plants are so easy to propagate. Not a big deal how much water you use at all. What kind of fertilizer and how much fertilizer for stems started in water? So it's rooting hormone. And you have 2 options. One is the rooting gel, and that's going to be after you take your cut. You've got the nice angled cut that you took. You dip this in just on the bottom. It doesn't need to be a ton, just onto where it's going to root from. And then you put that into the water. So this, you don't need much at all. It's best to not dip directly into the bottle, but to take some out onto a spoon or something and dip it there so you don't contaminate the whole bottle. This one, it has directions on the inside when you peel. So this one says preparations of cuttings. use 3 to 6 inch cuttings from the new growth on disease-free plants. Take the cutting, dilute 1 to 3 teaspoons per gallon of water. So that you can use for all your different plants. You can mix up a whole bunch, and then just keep switching it out with the hormone water. Will this session have a handout? We can answer that one. When I transplant rooted plants or leaf in soil, sometimes it rots. You're probably keeping it too moist. If it has too much of the leaf touching the soil, if it's a stem propagation, sometimes that can cause it to rot as well. But usually rotting is a sign of too much moisture. Can you propagate an unhappy staghorn fern? Most ferns propagate by spores or division. So if the base of the plant is not doing well, that may not help you. Staghorn ferns is also kind of a weird fern. I don't know if it has spores, so I can get back to you on that one, okay? I have 10 spiders rooting in water. Once they have some roots, what is the best way to combine plants in order to start a large spider? So I've actually done this a couple times. If you take your spider plant offsets, your pups, and you put a bunch of them in the same water glass as they root, the roots will all become mixed up in the bottom. And then you don't have to worry about when you plant them together, like what it's going to be, because it's already going to be 3 growing points in one plant. Otherwise, if you have a bunch of separate ones that have gotten a nice little root ball like this, you can just take them all out, put them in soil together, make sure the soil is really moist because it's used to water, pure water. So if it has dry soil, it will crash quickly. How or can I root raise rosemary? Herbs, like I said, super easy to propagate. If you just take a cutting, clear some leaves off, put it in water, it will root very easily. Foxtail fern can be propagated. Same kind of answer to the last one. Most ferns are by spore or by division. So if you have a fern that has spores on the back, those are little, they almost feel like bumps, almost bug looking, but in a pattern. Those you can tap the spores out of the plant and use those. That can be for a different class. That's not necessarily like a cutting propagation, but you can divide ferns. So if you want to uproot the plant, divide them and separate them, you can do that. What is the price of the collection of decanters that are in the metal frame? $59.99, and that is 9 test tubes in a metal frame. We also have little guys in metal frames. This one's only 10, so you can do little separate ones. Oh, thanks, Marianne. She said you were very good at showing and explaining how to propagate. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I appreciate it, guys. It's fun to be able to do this with you. I love propagation. I hope that kind of showed through. I have a ton of this stuff at home in my kitchen windowsill. And I think I've got more questions in the other screen. Let me take a look. Can you show the root gel again? I think I did, but just in case you didn't see. It's by Dynagrow. We sell a lot of their products. We recommend them. Will this program be later on YouTube? It will. Is the Dyna thing fertilizer or for root 1? So this is also Dynagrow. This is the rooting concentrate. This is a liquid rooting hormone. This is to mix with water, not to use directly from the bottle. Most orchids, I have a question here on how you propagate most orchids. It's going to be division. Actually, in the book, oh, here we go. This is an orchid. And they just go ahead and cut with a knife to separate and pot the new plant. So if you can kind of see that there's 2 growth points on that, and that's going to be division. You're just cutting it in half. When putting the rooted plant, if there are too much root, can some of the root be cut off? Yeah, just like potted plants, if you pull out your potted plant and there's just a lot of root there and you just want to break it up so it can more easily root into a new pot, you do just kind of rip off the roots at the bottom. It's not going to kill the plant. It will stress the plant though. So being sure to be nice to your plant afterward. All right. Anyone else have questions? You want to toss them in the chat? What about a pine tree? That's going to be more of an outdoor thing. I'd have to get back to you. You might be able to do a hardwood cutting. Yeah, I think that's it. Any last minute questions? Throw it in there. I'm sure you guys have lots of houseplants that need love. Winter is tough. Can you explain the difference between roots that have developed in water and roots that have developed in potting mix, and how the plant slows its growth when it is first in the water? So do you mean once you've rooted it in the water? Like if I wanted to plant the spider plant in soil? So yeah, any plant that's in a transition stage is not going to grow as well as when it's nice and comfortable. So going from roots that are grown in soil, and you'll see, or in water, you'll see that they're thicker. They almost look fuzzy sometimes on some plants. But when you look at roots that have been in soil, they're much thinner. They don't have that kind of bloated look that the ones in water do. So that's the visual difference you'll see. I think it's just to better adapt to the substrate that it's in. But the key there is once you put it in soil to keep it as wet and kind of slowly let it get drier. Things like spider plants are flexible. You can mess up with them and they'll still do a good job. Other things are a little bit more sensitive. Can you propagate geraniums? That one is also an outdoor question more so. I can get back to you guys on some of that stuff though, or we'll do another class for specifically garden plants. All right. I had a great time teaching you guys. Let us know how you like the class. We'll be sending out a list of all of the materials I used and the prices that you can get online. If you don't like what you see there, you're welcome to come inside the store. We have so many other bottles and things that I didn't show you today. This is another one that we sell. That's 40. You got 5 different glasses here. Great for a windowsill, nice and narrow on a frame. All right. You guys have a great day. Enjoy.